Did you know? During the initial planning stages, Persona 5's story was going to involve a backpacking journey around the world, and would have focused on the theme of self-discovery. However, just as the team began solidifying the game's direction and storyline, the catastrophic 2011 Tohoku earthquake struck Japan. The quake and its aftermath deeply affected Persona 5's director, Katsura Hashino. It compelled him to focus the game on Japan, with the intent of expressing his changed views on the nation. Hashino believed Persona was a contemporary drama of sorts, and decided the team had no choice but to change the direction of the game to focus on how the mindset of the Japanese had changed following the recent quake. Hashino told 4Gamer, "From this point on, we had no intention to fly around the world, and started to look at the adventurous spirit of the human mind instead. Don't remain how you are, try something different." So, by connecting the idea of an inner revolution to the theme of the game, a new idea came about. During the game's early production stages, the team also toyed with the idea of having an action battle system with real-time elements. After briefly testing out a few ideas, they quickly came to realize that completely changing the battle system would mean throwing out everything the studio had built up and learned over the entire series. This was seen as a step too far, so the studio focused on improving individual elements of the game's battles, such as the Persona Fusion system, rather than rebuild everything from scratch. Other cut ideas involve Hifumi Togo, who was originally supposed to be closely involved in the game's storyline and ultimately joined the party as a Phantom Thief herself. However, the development team felt the game's story was already long enough as is, and decided to reduce Hifumi's role to simply serve as another confidant. One early design for the main character was dropped after character designer Shigenori Soejima felt he added too much to it and wanted something simpler. Another early design of the character was dropped due to director Hashino claiming it to look too professional. Soejima also believed that his initial changes to the design felt too cheap. The main character's alternate persona was originally based off of Mephistopheles, the demon from the classic German legend of Faust. This was later changed to the gentleman thief Arsène Lupin, a character made by French writer Maurice Leblanc. This was because the team felt Arsène better fit the game's picaresque tone. Picaresque fiction usually follows the adventures of lovable rogues who rebel against society armed only with their wits. The genre originates from 1554 Spanish novel Lazarillo de Tormes, also known as The Life of Lazarillo de Tormes, His Fortunes and Adversities. Hashino explained the game's picaresque inspiration, saying, "If there's one thing that lies at the center of our themes in this game, it's the notion that there are things people want to do with their lives but can't actually realize for one reason or another. I feel as though people like that often take well to thief and heist stories, because they get a certain thrill that resonates with them in ways they can't necessarily get out of other stuff." One of the goals with Persona 5 was to give those people an outlet to explore those thrills and experience that sense of freedom. Almost all of the Phantom Thief starting personas reflect this theme, and are named after famous outlaws or criminals. Ryuji's persona is Captain Kidd, named after the Scottish pirate William Kidd. Ann's persona is Carmen, named after the seductress dancer featured in Bizet's opera of the same name. Morgana's persona is Zorro, named after the famous Californian vigilante. Yusuke's persona is Goemon, named after Goemon Ishikawa, who stole from the rich and gave to the poor in 16th century Japan. Makoto's persona is Johanna, named after Pope Joan, who disguised herself as a man to infiltrate the Roman Catholic clergy. Haru's persona is Milady, named after Milady de Winter, the French spy from the Three Musketeers. One exception to this is Futaba's persona Necronomicon, named after the famous textbook found in horror stories by H.P. Lovecraft. Other inspirations on Persona 5 include the classic Chinese novel Water Margin, as well as the popular Lupin III series, which follows the exploits of Arsène Lupin's grandson. The theme of people being imprisoned in mundane lives also inspired the name of the protagonist's school, Shujin Academy. Although written differently, the name Shujin is almost phonetically identical to the Japanese word for prisoner, Shujin. On the flip side, the game's stylistic UI was designed to reflect the rebelliousness of the game's heroes, as well as magnify the contrast between characters' boring school life and their fantastical exploits as Phantom Thieves. Persona 5's art director, Masayoshi Suto, also sought out to create a UI that stood out in magazines, particularly those oriented towards females. This was a challenge he had never faced throughout his long career with Atlus. Hashino also admitted that the team had a hard time finding the right balance between form and function. In fact, earlier versions of the UI were so wildly animated that it became too hard to see what was going on. This prompted the team to carefully adjust the UI until it achieved the right balance between style and clarity. Persona 5 also has a fair share of secrets. For instance, lead sound designer Kenichi Tsuchiya created many of Morgana's sounds using his own cat. Tsuchiya admitted in an interview with Famitsu, "I love my cat so much I had to add her sounds into the game." Speaking of Morgana, when entering Mementos for the first time, the character reveals the ability to turn into a bus. He then states, "For some reason, cats turning into buses is an extremely widespread cognition among the general public." This is a reference to the Studio Ghibli film My Neighbor Totoro, where the main characters wait for a bus that turns out to be a cat. Interestingly, an early idea for Morgana was to have them transform into a sports car. However, that would have been too small to fit the player's party, so the idea was scrapped. Another Easter egg many players missed links to the name of the coffee shop which the protagonist lives in, Café Leblanc. This is very likely an homage to the French author and creator of Arsène Lupin, Maurice Leblanc. One of the movies that players can watch at the theater, The Cake Knight Rises, is an obvious reference to the Christopher Nolan Batman trilogy. Some players may recognize that the music playing in the background is actually ripped straight from Catherine, which was developed by the Persona team prior to working on Persona 5.
Is it too quick? You can't savor all the little taste sensations.
As a quick aside, this isn't the only Persona game to reference Catherine. In Persona 3 Portable, there's an unnamed man drinking alone in Club Escapade. This is none other than Vincent Brooks, the protagonist of Atlus's puzzle game, Catherine. This is particularly interesting as Persona 3 Portable came out about a year and a half before Catherine did in Japan. A great deal of the posters scattered about Akihabara and Persona 5 are actually derived from real movie and DVD posters that have simply just been shrunk down to a tiny resolution. Some of the posters feature titles such as Fight Club, Edward Scissorhands, West Side Story, Independence Day, Ocean's 11, and Michael Jackson's This Is It, among others. One especially odd inclusion, though, is a DVD cover of a Star Wars fan film named Dark Blood. Several placeholder images also exist in the game's data which directly rip movie posters. This includes Expendables 2, The Black Dahlia, and a book cover from an artist collection called Japanese Cinema Poster Set, Toei Jidaigeki Volume 3. Persona 5 also references other media, such as during a scene where the group talks in Futaba's room. In the scene, Yusuke rearranges the poses of Futaba's Sentai action figures to match the poses of the Ginyu Force from the Dragon Ball manga and Dragon Ball Z anime. This is fitting as the Ginyu Force are heavily inspired by the Super Sentai series. Another interesting nod points towards the Tarot de Marseille, a popular and influential tarot deck from 16th century France. The design of the 22 arcana are very closely based on these cards, and even preserve the French names on each card. The game received few alterations in its various regional releases. In the Korean and Chinese versions, Ryuji Sakamoto's civilian shoes had their rising sun flag symbol removed. This was likely due to the flag being linked to historic events that negatively impacted the people of both China and Korea. When time came to release the game, the Las Cabos restaurant in Shibuya was officially fashioned with the theme of Persona 5 for a limited time to promote the product. The new menu was entirely inspired by the game, with food and drinks based off of Persona 5's characters. The game also received a convenient boost to its pre-order sales after Square Enix announced Final Fantasy XV would be delayed, removing all competition from Persona 5's launch window. In just 3 weeks, the game became Atlus's best-selling game in Japan, and would go on to be the fastest-selling Persona game ever internationally. Wild Jokers reveals the 76th character in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate took many by surprise. Masahiro Sakurai has actually been a longtime fan of the series, ever since playing the first Persona game on the Sony PlayStation. In fact, Sakurai lavishly praised Persona 5 in his column for Famitsu in Volume 515, saying that although he loved the game's character designs, mechanics, music, and story, the UI impressed him most of all. Sakurai wrote, "If there was a game UI contest held tomorrow, Persona 5 would probably win by a mile. It's magnificent." Despite being extremely busy during the development of Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, Sakurai dedicated his limited free time to completing Persona 5 and seeing as much as the game had to offer in a single playthrough. He was able to max out his relationships with each of the game's confidants except for one, Yusuke Kitagawa. This was because Sakurai avoids using guides when playing video games, not wanting to spoil himself and preferring to discover everything on his own. However, Sakurai overestimated the game's length, thinking it would conclude in March when actually it ends in December. After learning this, Sakurai desperately kept reloading older saves over and over again, trying to optimize his schedule as much as possible to complete Yusuke's storyline in time. But despite his best efforts, it was sadly too late. Did you also know that Sakurai's pushed himself so hard during development that he was hospitalized? For more facts, check out our video on Masahiro Sakurai. And I've been RelaxAlax. If you're wondering how Sakurai or anyone loves Persona 5 this much, I implore you to check out my video on it. I may even get you to play it.